Hello, thank you for watching Sashiko channel. This is Atsushi. One of the frequent questions I receive is about knots at the beginning and ending of Sashiko stitching. I understand it can be confusing because one book says make knots and other articles might say do not make knots. I answer the questions on live streaming, so here it is. I understood and summarized the questions as follows. The question and request was 1. A request for discussion on knots and no knots in Sashiko. 2. Is there variation in traditions among stitches? 3rd, is the book oversimplified? Please listen to my unedited answer first on the live streaming. Okay, there was a question on the YouTube. Can you discuss the use of knots, no knots in Sashiko? You don't use them, but some of the books I have from Japan do. Is there variety in the tradition among stitches, or are the books oversimplified? So the question is about knots. I hope I will read it again. I'm sorry, because this question will not be recorded on the live. So I will read the question again. I'm sorry. Can we discuss the use of knot and no knots in Sashiko? The Japanese don't use them, but some of the books available from Japan do. And is there variety in the traditional among stitches, or are the books oversimplified? The answer is that you can make knots and you can make no knots too. You don't have to make knots. It's a choice. It's a very much a choice, and it depends on the project. For example, the project what I'm working on right now, this is one layer of the piece. So the front is, this side is the front and this side is the back. I want to make both sides as clean side because there's not going to be any covering. If I have a knot, or if I have knots, if I make knots, it's very obvious that this is the back side. I would like to avoid it, so I make no knots. When I work on some mending on the denim, sometimes it's impossible to make kasane to stop it, then I make knots. So it is okay. It is very okay to make knots, and it is okay to make no knots. The point I always ask is that I want you to be able to choose. So if you decided to not to make knots, that's perfectly fine. You will learn that. But I don't want you to be in the status of I cannot make knots. Vice versa too. If you decided to make knots, that's perfectly fine. But at the same time, I don't want you to say that I don't know how to make knots, therefore I will make knots. So I don't want you to make it as an excuse. I just want to make sure that you can do both. There's a big difference between can't and don't. And as long as it's a don't as a choice, I'm perfectly fine if you make not or no knots. But traditionally, to answer your question, yes, there's a difference between the regions, difference between the even community, I guess. Some people in one community made a lot of knots, the other don't. So it varies. The book often explains or focus on one sashiko, one part of sashiko, and that's why I keep saying a lot of books are not wrong. They're not wrong, but insufficient. That doesn't explain the whole picture. So if one book say all sashiko makes knots, that's a very oversimplified statement because there's a sashiko which doesn't make any knots. So I just want to make sure that the sashiko, we pass down sashiko as a whole by introducing our sashiko, which is probably different from the other sashiko as well. Like, is there any good? After this, my personal answer to this question, I then move to a discussion with Sharon if we can find a similar example in the US ordinarily. Although it is not the exact same discussion, we came up with an interesting topic, the topping of pineapple on pizza. If you are interested, Please check the whole live streaming on February 14th, 2021. To summarize the question if a Sashiko stitcher should make a knot or should avoid making a knot in Sashiko stitching, I would summarize as follows. 1. There is no should in the decision of making a knot or not. It is based on the preference and project condition. However, I want a Sashiko stitcher to be able to choose. There is a big difference between can't and don't. One shouldn't say that it is normal to make knots in Sashiko without the ability to avoid making knots. Sashiko existed in numbers of places and communities in Japan. Therefore, there is much variation in traditions among stitches. However, within my understanding, all of the Sashiko stitchers I have talked to can choose kasane or making knots. They can choose. That's what I want you to aim for. It is almost impossible to write the whole picture of Sashiko in one book. It is similar to writing a book about all cooking in one book. We would need to focus on each cooking style, like how to make some Japanese blah blah. For that, some books I know are oversimplified, unfortunately, without proper explanation. There are many reasons why the Japanese use kasane to avoid knots. It is very important to learn why and how to avoid the cultural appropriation. It makes so much sense when we learn the stories. The Sashiko was a stitching practice in poverty. They didn't have luxury to cover the backside of the fabric. They wanted to make the backside as beautiful side as the front. Then the knots became a problem. Meanwhile, when the purpose is for purely mending, knots could be must. Therefore, we can find knots in some borrowed pieces. It is my goal and intention to share the whole picture of Sashiko. Please follow our channel and accounts to learn more about Sashiko. The knowledge you have about Sashiko is probably correct. However, if you do not read Japanese, I can say your knowledge of Sashiko is not sufficient yet. Not knowing is okay. I am here for that, to share. Please do not ignore the voice once you learn the whole. And that's all I'm asking. I added some links to useful articles and information in the description field. I hope you enjoy them. Thank you.
So the piece that I'm working on right now, I'm doing no knots because it overlaps. But the other piece that I have in progress right now has lots of patches put onto a piece of linen. And wow. I'm using knots on this, and I'm going to make it into a bag, but it needs to be sturdy and it's very rustic. Mm-hmm. And so I think the knots, which are going to be on the inside and you'll be able to see, are okay. You know, you can see the fact that stitches go two directions. And so when I need it to be stronger rather than prettier, then I might put knots in, like a denim patching. I would definitely use knots, because without knots, you'll end up with thread ends eventually as it wears out. So